At Boar's Head, we place a premium on authenticity, and the home-roasted flavor of our Ever-Roast chicken is no exception. Inspired by a medley of ingredients from the garden, a family recipe, and slow-roasted craft. It's the authentic taste of home and the unmatched quality of Boar's Head. Ever-Roast chicken, sliced fresh at the deli, only from Boar's Head. Compromise elsewhere.
Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. This is a special episode of Animal Chatter with Kellie and Leah. Today we're talking about what does it mean to investigate humane farming. What is humane farming? What does it pertain? And this was a question that we got. Does it pertain only to things like slaughterhouses? Does it also pertain to things like milk production, dairies, eggs, those kinds of things? And one person wanted to know about fruits and vegetables. Now, I don't know if humane farming has anything to do with that, but that's our topic for today. So our guest is Gail Eismitz. She is a chief investigator at the Humane Farming Association. I know Leah is standing by as well. We'd like to welcome you to the show. Gail, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start out with a little bit about you. How did you become an investigator with the Humane Farming Association? Was it something, did you grow up loving animals? Did you grow up in a farm? What a little bit about your background that led you to where you are today and the work that you're doing?
Well, my background was in natural resource conservation, so I was interested in protecting wildlife from extinction. But I ended up working for the Humane Society of the United States as a writer and ultimately as an investigator. And while I was there, I received a complaint from an individual who worked in a slaughterhouse who said that the cows at that particular slaughterhouse were having their heads skinned while they were still fully conscious. And I looked into that. I looked into that complaint, and I found out that was just almost standard practice across the United States. I ultimately traveled all over the country into slaughterhouses across the country and wrote a book called Slaughterhouse, which exposed violations of the Federal Humane Slaughter Act in slaughterhouses across the country. And that generated some attention from Congress, and the Humane Slaughter Act was funded for the first time as a result of the book. So that's where my interests in farm animals lie. And I started out with slaughterhouses, and now I look at factory farms and other slaughterhouse violators as well. Other farm animal violators as well.
That stopped, right? That's not a common practice anymore, is it?
It's not uncommon. It still happens. I've received records under the Federal Freedom of Information Act that show that animals are routinely or commonly shackled while they're still fully conscious, lifted up on the bleed chain, and have their their throats cut while they're still fully conscious. And one plant that I investigated not too long ago, there were thousands upon thousands of cows that were getting down the bleed chain to the point where they had no legs and no skin, and they were still struggling and attempting to vocalize. So it's not an uncommon thing. It still happens to this day.
Right. Do you think that it continues because people don't know that it is happening? What do we need to do to ensure this stops? I'm vegan, so I'm doing my part. But is it a matter of educating people that these things go on, or is it laws that need to be changed or enforced? How do we stop this?
Yeah, I worked really, really hard to get this on network television, and I worked with 60 Minutes and Dateline and another network program, and they all worked with me for months on end. They interviewed my workers who had signed affidavits saying that they were being forced to skin and dismember animals alive, and all the networks ultimately bailed out, saying it was too disgusting and that viewers would change the channel. So it's like they didn't give people a chance to know about what was going on because they thought that people don't want to know about this, but the people who have read my book are extremely responsive. So it's a matter of educating the public.
Right. Now, I know you know more about the cattle industry, but have you worked with any of the poultry farms? I know in the area that I live in, there was recently a large poultry farm that was pretty much shut down because a local access television crew went out there and filmed what was going on, and they were selling these eggs as being organic and free range, and then they did some investigating undercover, of course, that showed that this was not the case. Do you know anything about, is the poultry industry as bad as the beef industry, or are they all pretty much the same?
They're all pretty much the same. I mean, the conditions under which laying hens are confined are just atrocious. I think that people know about this nowadays. It's been in the news quite a bit. But, you pack 5 hens into a cage the size of an old-fashioned record album with that much floor space. They literally peck each other to death, even though they've had their beaks trimmed, because the conditions are just the deprivation is so severe. And their toenails grow into the wire mesh flooring that they're standing on. They can't even be comfortable when they lay their eggs because they're standing on sloping wire flooring, which is just the antithesis of what they should be standing on, like grass or something. But conditions in egg factories are really bad, and conditions in broiler operations aren't so good either because the broiler birds, the meat birds, are forced to grow so fast that they have heart attacks. They can't even stand up properly. It's just. I'm not trying to sensationalize it. I'm just, mentioning the facts.
It seems like a barbaric practice to me and to everyone in my immediate circle. I'm just wondering, is this like a worldwide thing, or is this something that it's just the factory farms, the factory meat producers in the United States? Do you know if this is an issue that exists worldwide, or is it just, I think really in the United States, so many of these factory farms, it's all about the almighty dollar, and they don't really care if it's humane, and they see some of these laws as an inconvenience, and rather than realizing this is what the consumer is calling for, in many cases, I think they just think, well, if we do it that way, it's going to cost us more. But is it a worldwide thing?
Well, unfortunately, it didn't used to be a worldwide thing. It used to be a United States thing, but we're exporting our consumptive ways to developing nations, and where animals used to be raised in less confined situations, now these intensive confinement operations are popping up rather quickly in foreign developing nations, which didn't even used to raise that large number of farm animals. I mean, we're exporting our consumptive appetites as well. I mean, in China, for example, that country now slaughters a staggering 735 million pigs a year. That's about half the world's pig production. And whereas we used to, I'm not sure what the actual number of, I have a statistic here somewhere. Yeah, in 1965, 10 billion farm animals were slaughtered worldwide. And in 2009, and I think it's about the same today, 56 billion farm animals are slaughtered worldwide, and that does not include fish. So
Right.
we're exporting our consumptive appetites as well as our consumptive technologies.
Do you know, this is a question someone just posted here, do you know anything about the dairy industry, and is it possible that some of the smaller producers are treating the animals more humanely, or is everyone kind of competing where the thinking is, well, if the corporate farms are doing this, I'll do it too? That was a multifaceted question, but
dairy has its serious problems. I mean, we investigated a large dairy in Washington State and found that many of the animals were not being treated properly, and when they had mastitis, which is an infection of the udder, they actually cut off with a razor their teeth, the ends of their teeth, which is excruciatingly painful, and continued to milk them. We saw that at that particular operation, the dairy management was encouraging the employees to shoot or beat to death the bull calves that they had no use for. So they were left to starve for days, and if they didn't die of starvation, they would literally beat them to death, as a way to, get rid of them. It was just terrible, and we have documentation of all these facts. So as far as small dairies go, I imagine they could be more humane. My experience is just with the larger dairies.
Right. Do you think it is better? Now, I live in a very rural area, and I have friends and family members who, of course, eat meat. In spite of my best reasons why they should stop, they still can do. But they have a co-op here where they literally go and make a deal with the individual farmer or the individual rancher, and they know where the meat is coming from, and they know how many animals are on the place, and they know, how they're raised. Do you encourage people to do that? Or in my mind, at least, and it's just my opinion, I think doing something like that, even if it's ultimately more costly or certainly more time-consuming, is at least a better option. If you're going to eat meat, at least care enough about the animal who is giving its life for you to be educated in that. Is that a better option, do you think?
Yes, that's definitely a much better alternative than just going to the supermarket and buying what you don't know where it came from or any of its history. Yeah, definitely. I always say, if you're going to eat meat or poultry products, buy organic or buy local. It's definitely a step in the right direction.
Do you have any stats? This is another question on the environmental impacts of the large slaughterhouses. Now, they're specifically asking about slaughterhouses, but I would think the same would apply to dairies as well, as far as how that does impact their local environment.
I don't know specifically the answer to that question. I do know that the livestock sector emits more greenhouse gases into the environment than all transportation impacts combined. And that includes trains, planes, automobiles. It's an 18% of greenhouse gas emissions come from farm animal production through digestion and decomposition of manure, transportation, and crop fertilization. So I know that it takes a heavy toll on the environment, but I don't know specifically about slaughterhouse or factory farm pollutants. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think living in a rural area where we have one large dairy, everybody else is kind of little family places. I'm very lucky where I live, but we do have the one large dairy, and I know the people around that dairy that are in kind of close proximity. They have they've gone to court actually, and the dairy has to pay for their well water, the area residents' well water, to be tested periodically to make sure that the waste from the dairy is not contaminating the groundwater. So I think that's an excellent question. Thank you to everybody who is sending in these questions. Thank you so much. We'll try to get to all of them. But I would think that is a concern for people living in an area that is, populated by numerous feedlots. Feedlots is another thing. That's, kind of what happens to the cows when right before they're slaughtered. They're put on these feedlots and packed very, very densely into a small confined area where they are just pumped full of as much food and as much supplement. I'm using air quotes, which of course you can't see on the radio, but supplements that they give these beef cattle to make them gain weight and to make the meat fattier or juicier or whatever they're doing. I would think that would be a big problem economic or environmentally.
Right,
anyway.
And it is with hog factories and chicken factories as well. I mean, in terms of
yes.
noxious fumes that waft from the sites, it causes serious people become sick, nauseous. It causes nausea and brain confusion and headaches, and those are common results from living in close proximity to hog factories. There have been several lawsuits, contesting those problems because it is such a problem. People can't leave their windows open anymore because the smell is so overwhelming.
Well, I think also there have been lawsuits about property values going down when in particular feedlot or a dairy come in to the area, because it does. I mean, who wants to buy a house where every time you walk outside you smell, cattle waste? I wouldn't want to.
Right.
So I think there's a number of aspects that affect the local environment, which also affects the local economy. I know factory farms are billions of dollars a year in as far as their industry, and yet the people who happen to be in the same area as some of these big farms are kind of worse off, a lot worse off in some cases, economically and even as far as their health. I read recently a study, I don't remember now where exactly it was in another state, where over time the incidences of childhood asthma had increased something like 400% after a large meatpacking place with an associated feedlot moved into the area, and just the constant waste that gets tossed up into the air, and if it's carried by the wind, it can go miles and miles and miles. So I think all of those things are something we need to really try and educate the public more about. And we were talking before the show about how, a lot of times people just don't want to see it, or they don't want to hear it, or they don't want to know about it. Is there a way that we can maybe start the conversation without showing people the more gruesome images, just to kind of get it out there where people are having a conversation about this?
Right. Well, the Humane Farming Association has been running ads in major newspapers and magazines for many years, and they don't show graphic images. They just show what the problem is about factory farms. And in fact, that resulted in the most successful boycott in the farm exposing farm cruelty in the animal protection movement with the veal boycott. So that's one way that we try to expose the atrocities that are taking place. And also we do videos that we run on YouTube and on our website and try to get as many views as possible about these types of violations. We did one recently on horse slaughter, and people were really shocked about that because they didn't know that horses were being slaughtered for human consumption. And horses from the U.S. are going to Canada and Mexico to be slaughtered for human consumption overseas.
Right.
So we did something on that, and that was pretty successful. And we just did another two videos on the USDA's Livestock Indemnity Program, in which farmers and ranchers are compensated for animals that die from weather extremes, exposure to inclement weather. And we did a few videos on that because we don't think that taxpayers should have to foot the bill for farmers who don't take adequate care of their animals.
Right. And
So
in fact, Leah and I did an earlier show about that very topic, where these factory farms are getting reimbursed by the government, by taxpayers. We're paying for them mistreating these animals, and at minimum, people need to hear about that.
Right, because people were pretty surprised about that. First, they were surprised that farmers were being reimbursed for animals that died from suffocating in the snow and heat stress. And then they were even more surprised to learn that they were paying for it. The taxpayers were paying for it. So that was $134 million of our taxpayer money that was used in the last 3 years just to reimburse farmers for dead animals.
Right. Yeah, that's ridiculous. We have a question several people have asked. Is there a registry, or are there sites that you can go to find out about particular factory farms?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
There really isn't. And since they're not regulated by the federal government or state or local governments in any way as far as animal treatment goes, there's no state or federal laws governing the treatment of animals in factory farms. Nobody gets inside them. Nobody has any idea what's taking place inside these operations. I mean,
to me, that's horrible.
Yeah.
We truly need to change at least that. It's just I can't believe that there is not some kind of law that says these places have to be investigated. That's just wow.
No, there's no oversight, and when we attempt to have oversight, states are passing these ag-gag laws, these whistleblower suppression laws that prevent us from even having any access to the farm. So it's like what's going on inside factory farms is like a big secret. It's like they want to keep it a secret. They don't want us to have any access. Even in some states, some state laws call for making it a crime to photograph a factory farm from a public roadway. I mean, that's ridiculous. So,
wow.
Yeah. So they make it a crime to get a job under false pretenses or to take videotape inside factory farms without the knowledge and consent of the farm owner. So it's ridiculous. They're ridiculous laws. But I think one of the things that people need to realize is they do have power to change things. I think, of course, letting them know that this is going on is the first step. But I think if people realized, vote with your money, don't buy, meat. Right.
Have the conversations. If enough people start making those phone calls to elected officials or even to television news stations, I think a lot of the times people are kind of afraid to speak out. And we need to encourage people to speak out if they see something that isn't right or if they have a feeling that something should be looked at.
Right. Because, some of the things that we've seen inside hog factories are just chilling. I mean, one hog factory, I don't know if listeners know, but sows, the breeding female pigs, are kept inside tiny crates that are, in some cases, less than 2 feet wide, and they can never turn around. And at this operation, when those sows went down because they get arthritis, which is extremely common because they're living on concrete slats above their waste pits, and they also get respiratory problems from inhaling the fumes as they have very sensitive respiratory systems. And at that particular operation, when the sows went down and couldn't stand anymore, they were literally dragged outside, had chain placed around their necks, and were hooked up to a front end loader and lifted so that they strangled. They suffocated to death. And that was their way of dealing with old sows, cull sows that they wanted to get rid of. I mean, it was horrible. We were able to get that on videotape and got that on HBO. But another common practice, and these are all accepted industry practices, is the practice of thumping piglets. If they don't measure up in size, they take them by the hind legs and they what they call packing them, PAC, pound against concrete. They actually have an acronym for it to kill them. In some operations that we visited, the pigs were so deprived of any socialization or stimulation that they actually, it's not uncommon for them to cannibalize each other when they have a wound or an abscess. They actually cannibalize each other down to the bone and hide. And the hide that was left, the workers called rugs, because that's all that was left of the poor pigs.
Oh, God.
I mean, I can go on, but I'll probably lose you, your listeners.
I've been very silent throughout this whole conversation because I'm an emotional mess about this whole thing, and I just wanted to chime in for just 1 second because I'm learning a lot here. Not that there is a reason, but what is the reason for them to be so brutal in disposing of these animals? And in for instance, like, why would you strangle a pig to death when a bullet costs 42 cents? I'm not making that connection. Is it the evil of man? What is happening? Why are they doing this? Why is there no compassion at the very least when you've destroyed this animal to such an extent that it can't stand? Why would you go to the extra measure of making sure its last moments are absolutely horrific? What is it? I don't understand what it is. And in the bleed line, why are these animals still alive? Is it expediency? Is it because they can move and shuffle through quicker? What is, not that there is a reason, but what is the reasoning that the farmers, the industry gives in throwing a pig into a vat of boiling water and laughing as it tries to get out? What is that? Is it
and they
evil
did
of
laugh.
man?
They actually, in one operation, they actually chased a pig into the scalding tank for fun, so they could laugh. I mean, and the pigs that were being strangled instead of being shot, workers would actually go up to the pig and hug it while it was hanging there from the end of the chain, from the front end loader, would hug it and laugh, and they would all get a kick out of it. Part of it is desensitization that happens on these large operations, but one of the reasons they weren't using bullets and they were using strangulation was because they thought using bullets was not a safe practice, that it could ricochet and somebody could be injured. But that's ridiculous. I mean, other farmers use bullets or captive bolt guns all the time. But as far as in slaughterhouses, the problem is that the line speeds are so outrageously fast now that they don't have time to make sure that the captive bolt gun or the stunning equipment is working properly. They don't have time to double stun. They shouldn't really double stun animals. They should get it done on the first stun. But and I have so many affidavits from workers who talked about the fact that they were just not allowed to go down the line and restun the animal, that the supervisor would come when the animal was still fully conscious down the line and hold the animal's legs while they cut the skin, cut it down the midline, did whatever they had to do to bleed it, whatever. So it's just a matter of time, and that's the result of the fact that we have fewer and fewer slaughterhouses killing more and more animals now in the country. I mean, used to have a lot of small and mid-sized slaughterhouses operating, but they've been forced out of business by these high-speed operations that kill more than 1 million animals a year. So the workers have to do whatever they can to keep that line running, because if it stops for a minute, they lose like at least $500 to $1,000 per minute. So they have to keep that line running.
I think this is something that people need to know going on. I know personally several people who are on the fence about at least cutting meat out of their diets, not maybe going all the way and doing vegan, but maybe vegetarian or maybe pescatarian or something without the meat. Even if, and in my mind, even if you just cut out beef products, I think that goes a long way to telling these big corporations, if enough people do it, they will get the message. But I think really, at least the ones I've been familiar with, generation after generation of the same families work at many of these huge corporate factory farms, particularly in the slaughterhouses and with the beef industry. It seems to be where you have kids, you work there. When they're old enough, they work there, and their kids work there. And it's just the way that they're taught. It's just the way they're conditioned from the time they're small children. I have actually had face-to-face conversations with some of these people, and they say, it's just an animal. They don't feel anything. And that's what they've been taught.
Right.
So,
and some of the...
it's sad to me that they're taught that. But how do we combat that? What do we do to challenge that belief?
I mean, some of the workers are not generational workers. They're more like illegal immigrants, and many are just legal immigrants, and they just feel so powerless to do anything like stop the production line. From what they've told me, I mean, they want to. They'll sound the horn. There's a problem. They sound the horn, and the supervisor gets on their back to keep the line running. Don't stop the line for anything. So, I mean, I think they become sadistic. One worker talked to me about slicing the nose of a pig that was in the blood pit with him, and then sticking salt brine up his rectum just to watch the pig freak out. And I think he's put salt brine on the nose as well. And the worker confessed these things to me because it was a great relief to say these things, because he knew he had become sadistic as a result of the conditions that he was required to comply with. I mean, people that work in these operations just become sadistic. They become callous and insensitive just because they're required to do such horrendous things at such high speeds. It's incredible. I mean, we're talking about slaughterhouses that kill. One slaughterhouse I visited, and it may be increased now, but when I visited there a few years ago, they were killing 180,000 pigs a week. So when you're talking about kill lines that are going that fast, it's impossible to ensure that the animals are rendered unconscious before they're skinned and dismembered.
Right.
You know what I often think about? Sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
No. I'm listening, and as desensitized as I've become through the years, through different things that I've seen, it's still horrific to me to hear that this is still going on. Now, when I was kind of lobbying myself for animals to try to stop this practice, this was 30 years ago, and it breaks my heart to know that 30 years ago I was having the same exact conversation we're having right now, and nothing has changed.
Well, I think things have gotten a little bit better in slaughterhouses, perhaps. I mean, I still see, as I said, I get the Freedom of Information Act documents that show that animals are not rendered unconscious and are skinned and dismembered alive. But I think there has been funding, not to be braggadocious, but as a result of a cover story that we got in the Washington Post that resulted from my book. There has been funding for the Humane Slaughter Act, and there had never been a penny allocated to enforcing the Humane Slaughter Act for 50 years. So there's a little bit of progress, but I think it's so discouraging that we are exporting our consumptive ways to other countries, because now people who didn't even eat meat products or who raise animals in a more humane fashion are accepting the technologies that we use, which are extremely cruel. They're adopting our ways of raising and killing animals.
So how do we change it? What do we do? In my mind, every big act of change always starts with kids. So do we start with kids? And if we start with kids, are we going to terrorize them with, give them nightmares with videos? How do we make this change?
I mean, all I can say is join HFA for starters, Humane Farming Association, or at least, go to our Facebook page or our website, which is hfa.org, and maybe read a copy of Slaughterhouse, and I guess reduce consumption. I'm not saying stop eating meat or poultry or eggs or dairy. I'm just saying maybe reduce consumption. Vote with your consumer dollar. I mean, that's really the only way to do it.
Right. Now, you've mentioned your book. I want to talk about your book. So give us the title, and is it available on Amazon or through your website? How do people find your book?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. It's called Slaughterhouse.
Okay.
And
we'll post a link.
And it's also available through our website. So either way, it's easy to get.
Okay.
Gail, I noticed that you do have books for children too. There, just speaking about getting to the future of our world. The activity books that you have there, those are on Amazon as well. So it might be a way to introduce the thought process to children as well. Coloring books, activity books.
Yeah, I think those are only available on our website.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, those are great.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier today, I shared a link on Facebook, and I've shared it before because I've seen it several times now, where a little girl is talking about how she can't eat animals. She doesn't want to eat animals. She'll eat anything else on her table, but she will not eat animals. And I think that really screams to me that kids get it. Kids
right.
get the whole we should be kind things. So I think that's really important to maybe have a discussion through children's books. I think that's wonderful because I think kids naturally understand what being kind is, and they naturally understand that, you know, when I was a little girl, I was kind of famous for telling people animals were people too. And my grandmother would always laugh, and she would say, "Oh, no, 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 no. They're not people too. They're much better than people." So I was kind of raised in that idyllic sort of life, for me anyway, where I tell people I'm from a long line of animalholics and animal activists, even before it was common practice. And we were sort of those weird people that lived out in the middle of nowhere and had all those animals, because my grandmother was pretty well known for going and kind of stealing people's livestock before they could be killed. And she would bring them home.
Wow.
And, you know, we would have pet pigs and pet cows and it was endless. It was endless. But I still do that today. And it's really a direct result of the way I was raised. So I think it's so important to educate kids and teach our kids to be kind to other species. And, well, they have a hard enough time as adults being kind to other people. But I think if we start with the kids when they're very young, I think they'll get it. I think they naturally get it.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah.
I think too it can be confusing when we kind of segregate the animal. You love and you be kind and you nurture dogs and cats, but that baby piglet over there, no, you don't have to do that. That's for us to eat. So I think it can be very confusing to children too. So to be able to kind of unmask that illusion that certain animals are for us to love and to honor and cherish, but the other ones are for us to consume. Maybe if we can talk a bit about that too, and make sure that they understand that all animals deserve compassion, and it's not just the furry faces that we see every morning in our in our beds and at our door waiting for us to come home, that every animal deserves compassion and some kind of willingness to make sure that their life on Earth is a pleasant one and not, we're not consuming them and they're not victims of barbaric practices.
Right. I mean, they would be shocked to realize that we slaughter 30 million dogs every year for human consumption in Asian countries. I mean,
yes.
Because they're the furry creatures that everybody loves. But it's interesting to see how people were so responsive to the horse slaughter issue, because those are animals that everybody loves, and they're being slaughtered in an inhumane fashion for human consumption. So...
Mm-hmm. I mean, when it comes right down to it, I just have to say it. There is no humane way to slaughter an animal. And I think that a lot of people will agree with that, and some people won't, but there is no real humane way to take the life of a being that does not want to die. So however if we're able to monitor it, if we're able to make some rules and make sure that they're enforced. I know that's an issue. That's the issue. To be able to go into these places and make sure that they're doing it in the most humane way. There is no humane way to take a life of another creature. It's murder.
But as long as there are laws on the books like the Federal Humane Slaughter Act, they should be enforced. And the people that are supposed to enforce them are the meat inspectors in the slaughterhouses, and the meat inspectors have their hands tied by their supervisors who don't want to interrupt production line speeds for the slaughterhouse operators because the people at their headquarters, the USDA headquarters, all came from the meat industry. So when somebody stops the line, when the USDA inspector stops the line at a slaughterhouse, the slaughterhouse immediately gets on the phone to Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. says, start that line back up right now. So, I mean, it's all it's just not a good system right now.
Right. And I think really the end thing that we want people to understand, again, is people have the power to change things with their consumer dollar. And with bringing these things to light and talking about them and having conversations and asking questions of some of these big factory farms. Of course, you have to wade through, hundreds of gatekeepers before you get to the real corporate headquarters. But I think that's necessary. I think more and more people are waking up and realizing that these things are happening. I know I've seen people in my own area that have small family-run operations, and I know how they treat their animals. I know how their animals are raised. I know I know the veterinarian who takes care of their animals. I know it's possible to make a decent living providing meat products to other people. I've seen it. I know it can happen. But I also know they're not independently wealthy. They're not making billions of dollars a year. And I think that is the underlying issue that we're really looking at here is it's all in pursuit of the almighty dollar.
Right, and a lot of these people are contract growers. They work for the hog corporation. And I'll just give you an example because this is the antithesis of what you're talking about. But somebody had to give information about the number of hogs that died on their factory farm several years ago because the dead animals were being put in dumpsters, which is standard practice, and the dumpsters were overflowing and they were polluting the groundwater. So there was a lawsuit.
Wow.
And that company had 420,000 dead hogs on its operations in 1 year, that particular year.
Whoa.
And that's just animals that died on the farm. Those aren't even animals that are slaughtered. So that just gives you an idea of the way these places operate, these large factory farms operate. It's just it's not like the small farms like that you're describing where the farmers take, good care of the animals and know each animal and things like that. It's these animals are anonymous numbers that nobody cares about.
They're commodities. They've desensitized to the point where these living sentient beings are commodities. Like they were selling bricks. They look at them kind of the same way, and that's horrific. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and then I'll stop. But at one factory farm that we looked at, the slats in the flooring were so wide that the little baby piglets got their legs stuck, and so they just died there of starvation. They couldn't get extricated from the slat, from between the slats, and some of them were under brooders, and they just burned. And it's so common that they had names for those babies that burned to death. They called them baby back ribs, crispy critters, and dead bacon. So, it's just standard practice.
Right.
Do you know what I think of too is the people that we put in charge of slaughtering these animals, regardless if it's an industry or not, a factory farm. Our dollar is making these people do these jobs, and these people, drenched in blood and stench and the visions that they see every night, every day, they go home to their wives and their husbands and their children, and they walk around our streets, and I always think too, because I'm trying to bring some compassion back to my fellow human, and I think, what must that person be going through, and how do they switch from somebody that is so sadistic on that kill floor to going home and cuddling their newborn infant that is the size of a piglet. Do you know what I mean? There's such a disconnect there. How do they do it? And for us to realize that these people are actually out in society. They do this every single day. So maybe if that could be a thought that we plant, that because we purchase, we cause these people to do this, and then they have to go home. And I'm wondering what the alcoholism rate is. I'm wondering what domestic abuse rate is. What is the trickle-down effect to the mentality of these workers that are walking around in our society?
That's all in my book. I talked to workers who did become alcoholics, and I talked to workers who actually assaulted their spouses and their children and all sorts of things. So you're totally right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. That is the whole thing. I could honestly talk about for hours, but it seems like this, and this just occurred to me actually. It seems like the only people talking about it are the people that have been talking about it for years. So I think we need to maybe have a conversation in other places. I know recently. And again, I live in a very rural area. I'm surrounded by farms. In our tiny little, we literally still have a one-room schoolhouse, grades, kindergarten through 8th. So that kind of tells you how out in the middle of nowhere I am. They had a guy come in, and he was one of the people here who raise beef cattle, and he talked to the kids. And one of the things that stuck with the kids was he said to them, I know when a calf is delivered that it's going to end up, I'm going to have to kill it. And he said, and sometimes I've had to bottle feed that calf. And sometimes it's been wounded, and I have to hire veterinary care for that calf. And I do all of this knowing eventually I'm going to have to take that calf's life. And he said, so when you're going to McDonald's and you're eating your burger, think about how you are going to resolve that in your own mind. And the teacher, he had the kids crying, and the teacher told him, how can you come into my class and upset the kids? And he says, because I'm retiring in 2 years. I've caused enough damage. I don't eat meat anymore.
Oh, my gosh, you just gave me chills.
That guy, he's actually writing a book that I'm going to be publishing later on this year. I have a publishing company. But it's those kinds of things that I would like to see more of. It's those kinds of awakenings, for lack of a better word, at how we've programmed ourselves in society. We've programmed consume. It doesn't matter what you're consuming as long as you're consuming. And I think that's a broader conversation we need to have. But especially when it comes to our food, we need to have more in-depth conversations about what we're programming our kids to grow up and be like and to eat. And I don't know where else we start besides with our kids. Right. So we are winding down on the show. One more time, what is your book and your website and all of that wonderful information?
Oh, sure. It's Slaughterhouse. That's the name of the book. And the website is HFA, as in Humane Farming Association, hfa.org. And you can visit us on our Facebook page and see our new videos that talk about the Livestock Indemnity Program. And that's about it.
Awesome. Leah, do you have anything else to add to this conversation? I know I feel like handling you tissues through the phone, but
oh yeah, I'm shaking, and it's such a a sensitive topic for me because I am vegan and my husband is not, and I am guilty of bringing this into my home, and I don't know how to, besides divorcing my husband, I've been with him for 23 years, I don't know how to, and I've talked to people that are activists, and they say, don't be so hard on yourself, but I've refused to even be in the house when he's cooking it. So I have such a struggle with this. As the matriarch of my family, I know I have the power. I have the power, the almighty power of putting my dollar on that counter and saying, I want that dead animal. And I can't do it anymore. So I'm going to have a conversation with my husband tonight, and I'm going to show him some of these videos that are on your website, some of the pictures, because I've held them back from him because he's a true animal lover, but no, he's not. Do you know what I mean? So we have to be able to start within our homes. Kellie, you're absolutely right. It's the children. It's being in charge of what we consume, where we get it. And Gail, just thank you. Thank you for everything that you're doing.
My pleasure.
We need 1 million trillion people like you, and then we would be good, So thank you very much.
Can I just say one more thing? Just
Sure.
It occurs to me that the book that I wrote, just to get people more actively involved, the book I wrote is not written as a documentary. It's more the story of the investigation. So it's more almost like a novel, and then it is riddled with facts and information. But it's not a hard read. It's an easy read. So I just throw that out there in case anybody wants to read it, and maybe your husband would want to read it because that would be an eye opener for him.
Well, you can guarantee I'm going to, absolutely purchase that book for him. Definitely.
Well, I'm skimming through some of the reviews on the book, and it is just, absolutely one that I've actually ordered it just this second. And it's really something I think should be required reading because this is a conversation we need to continue having. But thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for everything that you're doing with the Humane Farming Association. And, please come back again sometime, and we will continue this conversation.
And thank you for spreading the word. That's where it's all happening. So thank you both so much for having me on today.
And you're very welcome. It's really been our pleasure, truly. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you everyone who has sent in questions and comments, and we have a bunch of comments on the show today. Thanks, guys, really. And there was somebody who was trying to call in with a question, and your phone kept hanging up, so I apologize for that. You guys have a beautiful day. Please continue this conversation. Share the show link with everybody, and we will see you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
At Boar's Head, we place a premium on authenticity, and the home-roasted flavor of our Ever-Roast chicken is no exception. Inspired by a medley of ingredients from the garden, a family recipe, and slow-roasted craft. It's the authentic taste of home and the unmatched quality of Boar's Head. Ever-Roast chicken, sliced fresh at the deli, only from Boar's Head. Compromise elsewhere. At Boar's Head, we place a premium on authenticity, and the home-roasted flavor of our Ever-Roast chicken is no exception. Inspired by a medley of ingredients from the garden, a family recipe, and slow-roasted craft. It's the authentic taste of home and the unmatched quality of Boar's Head. Ever-Roast chicken, sliced fresh at the deli, only from Boar's Head. Compromise elsewhere.